For those of you that are following your bulletin, I am not Linda May. You'll be pleased to know I will not be singing. You will also notice that I'm not Bruce Gentry, because since Lydia and Becky are under the weather, then Bruce is quarantining with them. So you get me today. So sorry about your luck. One of the things that I have been noticing as I have watched people over the last few years is I've seen several adults who are doing something that for a long time I didn't see them doing. For probably the last 5, 6, maybe 7 years, I've seen adults coloring. They even have adult coloring books where you can color these pictures that have these intricate little designs, and it looks like it'd take me like a year to color it, but they sit and they color all this stuff. And while coloring when I was growing up was something that kids did, I'm finding more and more adults are coloring now. I've heard some of them say that they enjoy doing it because it's a stress reliever. And so they color and it helps them just deal with some of the stress of the day. I've heard other people say that they color because it gives their hands something to do. It's like a fidget spinner, a fidget thing for adults, so they don't have to fidget. It's also something that's quiet. I saw one lady at our denominational meeting 3 or 4 years ago who they were doing the business and she was coloring. And I laughed about it with her husband later, and she heard me and she said, "No, actually it helps me with my attention deficit." She said as she colored, it gave her something to do so she could stay focused and she could pay attention a little better, a little longer. Whatever the reason, coloring has really taken off with adults, whether they're young adults or middle-aged adults or even older adults in recent years. But there's something that coloring teaches us, because one of the things coloring teaches us, at least as little kids, is that there are boundaries. There are constraints. There are borders in which things happen. There are things that dictate what we can and we can't do, how we can and we can't act, etc. We learn to color in the lines when we color, and when we do that, lo and behold, our pictures look a lot better than when we just scribble across the page. But as we grow older, we learn that these boundaries, these constraints aren't just for coloring. We learned that there are lines that we stay in for various other things. When you pulled up outside, you had lines in which you parked. And if you didn't park in the line, then people grumble under their breath about you and ask where you learned to drive. But we learned about parking spots, physical lines that we park in. When we drive our cars on the road, we have lines that we stay in. We have lanes, and we learn to drive in our lane and not in someone else's lane. We have property lines that mark the space that we own. We learn that those lines, whether they're physical lines that we can see or whether they are rules that we live by or guide us, those lines are guidelines. They direct us. They help us make good decisions rather than bad ones. They help us do right things as opposed to wrong things. We learn about guiding characteristics, things that we were taught about when we were younger and continue to learn about as we age, whether that be honesty or integrity or sincerity. We learn those things that help us be better, that help us do better as we make decisions. Because when push comes to shove, we like to make good decisions. We want to make wise decisions. We want to do things that are going to help rather than hinder. We want to do good things rather than bad. So we want to do things that are going to honor our God. As this new year has begun, often our thoughts turn to ways that we can improve. And Aaron mentioned that a little bit ago. Whether we've made resolutions to do better in our physical abilities or our fitness or our weight or however much we might be reading or whatever that goal might be, we set goals, we make resolutions. But one of the areas that we need to focus on, very obviously as believers, is our area of godly living and that idea of living for God. More than just saying we believe something and going to church and throwing 20 in the plate every now and then. Godly living involves our faith. It involves our beliefs. It involves how God's word molds and shapes us and changes us and makes us different, even makes us better. We also see that godly living is something that we do personally. It's something we each do as individuals, but it's also something we together do. It's something we do as families. As parents, we help our children live godly lives. As grandparents, we influence not only our children, but our grandchildren to live godly lives. We want to honor God through the decisions that we make in our family and our behavior, our lifestyle. I wasn't planning to start this series until I came back on the 17th, but evidently God wanted me to start it earlier. So the series that we're starting is about living a godly life in various aspects of life, but also as family. It will address us as church family as well as biological families, living our faith, living godly lives. So how do we help our family live the godly lives that we are called to live? How do we reflect Christ and Christ-like decisions in the various areas of our lives? We're going to be looking at what it means to live a godly lifestyle in various areas, from work to worship to family. And we'll look at how we, both us and our household, our family, are called to live, called to serve the Lord. As a matter of fact, that's the title of this series, As for Me and My House. We're going to start off with a passage that I suspect many of you are familiar with, that Beth read part of in Joshua 24, where Joshua actually uses those exact words. And so to start this series, we're going to look at what Joshua tells Israel. We'll also look at what Joshua tells us today as we look at how we are called to and how we intentionally, individually and families, serve the Lord. So let's look a little more at our Joshua 24 passage and see what we are called to do. I'm going to pick up where Beth left off at verse 16 because I wasn't going to ask her to read 16 verses. And so we're going to read verses 16 through 22 of chapter 24. Remember that Joshua has just finished and said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Picking up at verse 16, then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight. He protected us all along the way that we went, and among all the peoples to whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God." But Joshua said to the people, "You cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, and he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good." And the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Then Joshua said to the people, "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him." And they said, "We are witnesses." As we look at this passage, I think you have to understand what's going on to truly grasp the fullness of it. Because as you look at this passage, you see that Joshua speaks to the people in what can only be described as a new setting. As Joshua has been addressing the people in chapter 21, from starting at verse 1 all the way through, they have finished taking the majority of the promised land. That process that began back in Joshua chapter 1 at the very beginning, where God promised to be with Joshua, and he tells Joshua 3 different times in chapter 1 to be strong and courageous, and God will be with him. God promises that he will be with him just as he was with Moses. And after that we see Joshua and Israel cross the Jordan River. And if you remember, they crossed the Jordan River during flood season. So the water is high, the river is rushing, but God does a miracle. The river is parted and they are able to cross on dry land. And the miracle not only starts the taking of the promised land, but the miracle shows that God is indeed with Joshua just as he has been with Moses. And as we read how they go in, and they begin by taking Jericho in chapter 6. And if you remember, as they took Jericho, this doesn't happen by their great military might or their prowess as soldiers, It happens because of a miracle of God. That Jericho falls with trumpets and marching, not with siege works and fighting. And this is how they begin the conquest of the land of Canaan. But as you read from chapter 6 all the way up to chapter 24, this has gone on for quite a while, and you've had numerous long, hard-fought battles. And as they've gone through this, Israel has learned a lot about themselves. They've learned about their own weaknesses, and specifically they've learned about their need for God's presence and their need for God's strength and their need for God to work in and through them and for them to be obedient. Where they could not defeat their enemies, they learned that God could. When there was no way for them to win because everything seemed to be working against them, God intervened. Whether it was in chapter 10 when Joshua refers to it as the sun standing still, but they have daylight for an extended period of time, much longer than would naturally have been there, and God gives them the victory, to lessons in obedience in chapter 7 with Achan's sin. A sin in the camp impacted all of them, not just the individual. Communally, they were punished for disobedience, just like communally they were rewarded for obedience. They've learned lessons about following God's direction. It's been a great time of learning as they have grown, as they have learned to trust God during this conquest. But now by the time we get to chapter 24, the land has pretty much been conquered. All the tribes have been given their inheritance. All the families have been given their piece of the land. Each region has been conquered. Now there are still little pockets of resistance that have to be addressed. You see this a little more in Judges chapter 1, but by and large, the land has been conquered and it is theirs. And so now as you get to this point in chapter 24, you have this transitional time because everything is about to change dramatically. They are going to transition from being this nomadic, wandering people to people who have an address, to people who stay in one place. They're no longer going to be living in tents, they're going to be houses. They're not moving from place to place, they're going to be living in their home on their land with their family. It's a change not only in lifestyle, but a change in behavior and perspective, because instead of wandering around constantly, they're going to be settling down. They're going to be starting homes and owning property and having families and inheritance to pass on. This is a complete and total change for them. Everything is about to be different. And as they prepare for this change, Joshua reminds them that still they have choices to make. That just because they're no longer wandering around, that they will still have decisions that they will have to make. They will still have guiding principles that they will need. And so he emphasizes choices that they have to make as they look forward to this new way of life, this new lifestyle, this even easier way of life, an easier lifestyle. Joshua tells them they have a choice. And there is a significant truth here because Joshua shows them that those choices actually need to be made in advance. That those choices need to be settled in their minds, in their hearts, in their spirits beforehand. Those decisions should be planned for and directed by what they already know. They should be made objectively based on their understanding of the truth, based on what is right. Before any kind of subjectivity or personalities or anything else gets involved, Joshua shows them that they need to think about what they will do. That they need to think about how they will do it. It's not enough to say, well, I'll deal with it when it happens. Joshua tells them they need to plan now for what they will do later. They need to consider now how they will respond to what happens later, because that type of decision making is better. It's not an emotional decision. It's not going to be swayed by what's going on around them currently or their circumstances. It's not going to be as subjective. He says you make the choice now before personalities or circumstances or other things that can cloud your judgment are present. And so Joshua tells them that they need to choose. They have choices that they are going to have to make, and so they need to choose. And then he lays those options out for them. If you look back at verse 1 of chapter 24, as he goes from 1 to 13, Joshua has been discussing all that God has done for them from where they started to this very point in time. And so he goes back to the story of Abram, who became Abraham, the father of the Jews, and he talks about how God called him and how he came to this land, and then how Israel traveled to Egypt and they became enslaved, but God sent Moses and Aaron to deliver them. That God had delivered them from Pharaoh, he had delivered them from the Egyptian, he had brought them into the promised land. This land of Canaan that they have come to. God has delivered them from the Canaanite kings and the nations, and he has given this land over to them. Now they have houses to live in that they didn't build. Now they have vineyards and crops to eat and drink, stuff that they didn't plant. Joshua starts by discussing all that God has done for them, bringing up to this point in time. And notice where he starts in verse 14. Now, therefore. Now, based on everything that I have just told you in the past 13 verses, he wouldn't have worded it that way. But based on everything that you've just heard, notice what he says. Revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity, in faithfulness. Joshua says to revere the Lord, to give God the reverence that is due, to recognize his holiness, recognize his righteousness, recognize that he is God. And then he says that they are to serve the Lord, they are to live in a manner that is pleasing to him, that they are to glorify him, that they are to honor him. He basically tells them that they are to live for the Lord. They are to do the right. They are to do the good. They are to do what they are called to do, what they should do. But then he gives them options because, again, it is a choice. Look at verse 15. If you are unwilling to serve the Lord, then make your choice. Choose this day who you will serve. Because they can serve the gods that their ancestors served beyond the river in Egypt. That's an option. Not a good one, but that's an option. They can serve the gods of the Amorites and the Canaanites in whose land that they are in now. Baal and Asherah and Moloch and the various other false gods. Again, definitely some bad choices that they can make, but again, those are options. But then Joshua makes this very bold claim. And he models for them, as every good leader should, models for them what he says at the end of verse 15. You each have a choice to make. And I can tell you what I'm going to do. Joshua says, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And Joshua's point is, while each of them has a choice to make, he makes it crystal clear what his choice is. He makes it crystal clear what his choice is and what the right choice is for them to make. But they have to determine their choice and what it's going to be. And Joshua wants them to understand that they will make a choice. He tells them to make a choice because a choice is going to get made. Sooner or later, intentionally or unintentionally, they will make a decision. They will make a choice. Whether they consciously intend to do so or not, they will make a choice about how they're going to live. They will make a choice about who they're going to live for, about what they will and will not do. It may be a spur-of-the-moment choice in a time where they are pressed or where they may be under pressure or at a time where they don't have a lot of time to think it through, but they will make a choice. And even if they say, well, I'm just not going to make a choice right now, that in itself is a choice. And their behavior, their perspectives will bear that choice out. As we begin 2021, we find ourselves in a new place. Yes, we're still in southeast Missouri, but we're somewhere we've never been before. It's a new time. It's a new season. And this passage applies specifically to us because we are facing a new setting. It will be a new year with new challenges and new decisions and new paths, as well as some of the same challenges that we have already been facing. COVID didn't magically disappear on January 1st. So that is still a challenge that we will face, but there will be other challenges that will be new to this year that we will face. And we can look back at 2020 and all that has happened. We can look at decisions that we have made or friendships that we have nurtured or ministry opportunities that we have participated in. We can look at family decisions that we have made. We can look at decisions regarding maybe our health or our homes or our cars or stuff. We can look at all the things that we've seen, and all the things that we've heard, and all the things that we have experienced, and we can see how we got to where we are today. But even seeing and understanding that, the truth of the matter is we can never go back. There is no rewind button. 2020 is done, it's in the books, it's finished, and those days are forever gone. What we have are the coming days, the coming weeks, the coming months to look forward to, because I can't do anything about what I did in 2020. It's done. We can see what brought us to where we are. We can learn from our mistakes. We can't go back and fix them. We can only go forward. But as we look at 2021, we see that, again, we have choices to make. We can't plan for every contingency. We can't know everything that is or isn't going to happen. We can simply make sure that our choices are made based on certain principles. We can decide ahead of time how we are going to make decisions and what kinds of decisions we are going to make. We can determine what kinds of decisions we want to make and what's going to guide those decisions. We can look at those types of things and plan ahead as far as what we will do and what will or won't guide us. In the words of Joshua, we can decide who we are going to live for. Because, as I said, it's always better to think those things through and make those decisions ahead of time rather than trying to make them spur of the moment, when emotions are high and circumstances make it harder for us to think clearly. Because we know what's right and wrong, and we can make the decision to do those right things ahead of time so that when the time comes, we know what it is we're called to do. We know what it is we need to do. It becomes almost a no-brainer because the decision is made. Joshua reminds us how we got to where we are, and he reminds us that it is God who has brought us to this point. God has blessed us. God is at work in our lives. He is at work around us. But we have a decision to make as far as how we are going to live, who we are going to live for as we approach this new year. Because I can tell you that the world around us will tell us there are several things that we should be living for and several things that should be guiding our decisions. Some people will say that our decisions should be based on money, that ever-present factor that makes so many decisions for us. And as we make decisions, we should be looking at, well, how is this going to affect our bottom line? Is this going to financially help us or hurt us? Or we can make decisions based on popularity. What will people think if I do this? How can I be popular and well-liked so everyone agrees with all of my decisions? Good luck with that. We can make decisions based on success or security or pleasure or health or any number of things. There are many, many other things that our world would emphasize and say, you need to take these things into account. But let me remind you back at verse 14 what Joshua says. Because he reminds us that we should revere the Lord and we should serve him. Before any course of action is taken, before any decision is made, reverence and obedience to the Lord come first and direct what we do, because they direct who we are. That should be our starting place. That should determine how we live, what we do. God in his word says this is what we are called to do. But as I said, Joshua gives us options. How should we live? What should we do? Because as I stated earlier, there are lots of options. Our world would point us to these numerous different things and say we should live for them, or at least seriously consider them and their impact for our lives. Because many would say those are deal breakers and game changers, and we have to consider those, and with those things in mind, we have to choose. But his point is that we will make a choice. Joshua is able to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And I want you to notice something there, because you need to see what Joshua did. Did you see exactly what he said? Because if you read it again, he said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. When Joshua addresses God's people, when he makes this statement for all of Israel to see, Joshua doesn't just speak for himself. He speaks for himself and his house. He speaks for his house, he speaks for his children, he even speaks for his grandchildren. He speaks for his family and makes a commitment for his family. because he explains how he is choosing and how he is going to make decisions going forward into this new time period, into this new situation. Joshua makes the point that he and his household are going to follow the Lord. They will serve the Lord. Let me tell you, parents, grandparents, dads, moms, grandmas, grandpas, members of Christian families, followers of Jesus Christ, our calling is to make the same commitment. As for us and our households, because our decisions don't just affect us, they affect those who are around us. Parents, your decisions affect your children. You decide how your children will be raised. You decide what your children need to do. So it becomes a question of how do you raise your children? How do you lead and direct your children in daily life decisions, in daily priority decisions? What do you show them is important by your actions, by your attitudes, by your words? What do you show them is acceptable? What do you show them is not acceptable? How will you lead your household to live for and serve Jesus Christ? And some of you are saying, well, my kids are already grown. Well, grandparents, your decisions affect your children and your grandchildren. And whether they're in your household or not, your decisions are far-reaching. So how are you going to influence your children? How are you going to influence your grandchildren? What are you showing them is still important, even now? How will you influence their decisions? How will you demonstrate godly priorities in your own attitudes and actions and decisions? What will you tell and show them is important in your life and should be important in theirs? Think about the Old Testament passage that said that the parents ate sour grapes and the children's teeth were set on edge. Or the passage where it talks about the sins of the parents are visited on their children 3 and 4 generations. Parents, we see that our decisions affect us, but they also affect our kids and their kids. They affect those who are around them. We need to take this responsibility seriously and lead our families well. We need to lead and live well. Because the point Joshua makes is that we will all make a choice. He tells them to make a choice because every one of us is going to make one. Sooner or later, intentionally or unintentionally, you will make a decision. Whether you consciously intend to do so or not, we will make a choice on how we live and what is or is not shown to be important. We will make a choice about who we will live for and what will be most important, highest priority, and what is not. We make decisions about what we do. And a situation may come and catch us by surprise. It may be a spur-of-the-moment thing. It may come in a time when we are pressed for time, under pressure, or tired, or just don't have the time to think it all through. But when those times come, the decisions that we have made today will affect those decisions tomorrow. So here on January 3rd of 2021, how will you choose? And as I said, even if you say, well, I'm not going to worry about that right now, I'll figure it out when it comes, our behaviors, our perspectives will very quickly show us what is and is not important. Our behaviors and perspectives will very quickly show who we are living for as well as who we're not. They will be a visible demonstration of what is guiding us and what is not. Now, I will say it won't always be easy. It won't always be popular or accepted by others. But you have to decide who you will live for, who you will serve. And what choice will you make? Because Joshua reminds us that the choice we are called to make is to serve the Lord, to follow Him and His Word. But who will you serve? Joshua says, make your choice now. Who will you serve? Who will you live for? Who and what will give direction to your life? What will be your guiding principle? How will you live in the coming year? How will you go forward? And you know, it's easy to say, oh, I'm just going to choose God. There's no question about it. That's Israel's response in our passage. You look at verses 17 and 18, they say, we will serve the Lord. And Joshua reminds them that God is a holy, jealous God. He reminds them that there are serious consequences that come with not serving. And if you go to the very next book, the book of Judges, it starts after Joshua ends. In Judges chapter 1, we read that Joshua dies and Israel does not serve the Lord. And while they said they would, they don't truly make the choice that no matter what, we will serve the Lord. No matter what happens, no matter how difficult things get, no matter who comes against us, no matter what's happening, no matter what benefit I might receive for not being faithful, we will serve the Lord. It's not where their hearts were. That's not how they chose to live. Their hearts were divided. They chose to follow other things. They chose to follow other gods. They worship Baal and Asherah and Dagon and Moloch and the various other gods of that area. The decisions that they made were not God-honoring, and they didn't live for God. And while they said one thing, they did something completely different. As we begin this series, as we are just a few days into 2021 and looking forward to many, many more days of 2021, let me ask you, how will you live this year? Who will you live for? Who will you serve? Because you can live for yourself. You can serve yourself. You can focus on taking care of yourself, making sure that you are secure or comfortable, making sure you have the toys or the technology or the stuff that says you're successful. You can do any number of things that's focused on you and taking care of you and serving you. Or you can even focus on those who are around you and making sure that what you do is impressive to them. Make sure that you have the trappings that say, look at me, I'm successful. You can focus on others and make sure that they see you a particular way, or looking at others and take your cues from them and go with the flow and do what everybody else is doing instead of following God's word. You can focus on any number of things, but let me remind you the words of Joshua. Now therefore revere the Lord. Serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. We're called to revere him in our lives, in our lifestyle, in our relationship with him, to serve him in sincerity, not just with lip service or show, but to live for him and to do what he calls us to do. Joshua said it. I will say it. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. What will you say today? Our musicians are going to come. They're going to prepare to lead us in our song of response. But as they come, let me ask you a couple of questions. Maybe this morning you realize that your perspective is a little off. Maybe you've been serving someone or something other than the Lord. What have you been serving? Who have you been serving? Have you been serving someone else? Have you been serving something else? What is first and foremost in your life? And if it isn't God, what has it been? Do you need to make a commitment to serve the Lord rather than someone or something else? Or maybe you've been serving someone or something else and it isn't just impacting you, it's impacting your household. Maybe it's impacting your kids. Maybe it's impacting your spouse. Maybe it's impacting others that are a part of your extended household, grandkids, whatever. You need to commit to serving him and to leading your family to serve him as well. You need to ask God for help to make that commitment and then to stick with it even when things get tough, so that you can lead and influence your family in a God-honoring way. Or maybe this morning you're saying, but Pastor Jim, I have been serving the Lord. And maybe you have. And maybe as you're serving the Lord, God's spoken to your heart, and as he's trying to speak to you, he's moving you towards some new form of ministry. He's leading you to serve in a fuller manner, and he's opening a door and saying, this is where I want you to go as you serve me. Maybe you just need to say yes to that. As Christ is speaking this morning, and Christ is speaking, what's he saying to you? How is he asking you today on January 3rd, 2021 to respond to him? And what great and amazing things does he has in store for you as you go into the rest of this year with the perspective of serving him and following his leading? God has great and amazing things in store for you personally, in store for us as a church family, but it starts with our perspective being right. If you need to make that commitment, will you commit to serve the Lord this morning? Our musicians are going to lead us as we sing. Let's stand as we sing. Well, we have gathered this morning that we might worship, that we might encounter Christ, that we might start our new year right, and that we might experience what He has for us, that we can make a difference in our world and be used for Him. So having gathered to worship, let's go forth and serve and minister in His name. And as you go, may the peace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you and remain on you now and forever. Amen.